I am Troy Smith, and this is Ralph Bowden, and we are here at Foxleaf Books, where we have very kindly been allowed to participate in a writing workshop here for some time. And now we're using this as the locale for a series of interviews about writing and writers with the assistance of Vicky Sipcar. I have had the great privilege and joy of sort of coordinating this workshop, so I'm going to kind of sort of coordinate this interview. We're just going to start flying and see what happens. Ralph Bowden has written, how many books have you written?
Well, it depends how you define a book. Now, let us define our terms. You know, I speak as an old professor. I don't know. Books on my hard drive, there's probably 25, of which 20 are novels, and there's a 3-act play and 4 short story collections, about 35 short stories altogether. I think at last count, I can't keep up. These are written over the last 25 years. They're the outgrowth of boredom as a tech writer. I had to grind out stuff every day to explain software, hardware, industrial maintenance operations, and that sort of thing. And it, for an 8th grade reader, which is what many industrial maintenance workers are, and software engineers are sometimes worse. But anyway, I had to grind out all this stuff, and it was deadening. And in the evenings, to leaven my soul, I would start to write fiction. First it was just letters to my daughter, stories. And then I started to tell myself longer stories and more stories. And that was in like 1988, 89, something like that. And it's grown as a compulsion, as a bad habit, good habit, I don't know, ever since. For the sake of entertaining myself, I tell myself stories. And whether they would be interesting to anybody else, who knows? Who cares? So that's where I come from.
Can you name any specific writers that you feel have been influential on you?
I can remember reading one of Doctorow's books and thinking, what are these initials?
E.L.
Yeah. And thinking, boy, he says something interesting in every sentence. I wish I could write like that. So that's sort of what I've have striven for, is to have every sentence worth reading and not worry too much about the big picture and where the story goes. If it's interesting and worth reading on the word, sentence, paragraph level, suits me. That's what I read for. As far as what I've read and what authors might have inspired me, otherwise I read anything. I'm a reading whore. I'll take on any book that anybody passes over and read it, and often review it. I've reviewed books for the Nashville Scene and for the Humanities Tennessee website now quite frequently. And I get a wide variety. I get assigned the books nobody else wants to review. So my editor will send sometimes awful books, just terrible. Mostly by Tennessee writers. That's not to say anything Tennessee writers are awful. But some of the books are just terrible. And I have to be positive. The whole point of the Humanities Tennessee website is get people to read. Don't say anything bad about these books, no matter how bad it is. So it's a stretch sometimes to damn with faint praise, but do it in such a subtle manner that nobody realizes that's what you're doing. But I haven't published anything except for little story collections, as I said, and they're here in Foxleaf Bookstore. Come by, and buy, B-U-Y. And just within the last couple of weeks, I've decided to see if I could make CreateSpace work for me. So I have jumped through their hoops and published, I guess that word still counts, an old novel that I wrote 12, 13 years ago, just to kind of see if I could do it and to have something in print that I could, brag about, I guess. Authors always have egos. Mine's pretty weak. I'm not driven to publish. Once or twice I tried to see if I could get an editor or an agent interested in something I wrote, and they invariably wrote back and say, well, yeah, it's all right, but I don't think I could sell it, or I don't think we could make anything of this. So, and that's really the bottom line in the standard, the traditional publishing business. Can they make any money out of your books? And I don't write books that are blockbusters or that anybody can make any money out of. So that's why I've tried the self-publishing route with CreateSpace here. It doesn't cost me anything. It gets the book on Amazon, gets a Kindle version of it, an ebook version of it if you want. I've got a couple of my short story collections and another novel on Smashwords, which is, I think they're all still free. I may have put a $2 price tag on one of them. But that makes anything you write available in all ebook formats. But I haven't sold anything, or gotten a couple of reviews, I think, from friends and relatives.
What's the name of the novel that you put up on Smashwords?
The Fiona Letters, and it's, I think it probably is overall my best novel. It's number 16, I think, in the series, and it's a meat grinder version of my dissertation, using the same person. It's an historical thing. It's all right. This is the way it goes. There's a doctoral student in Cambridge University Library. It's all very autobiographical, and he's trying to do a dissertation on Lord Kelvin, Sir William Thomson, the famous at the time British scientist and engineer, Victorian era, a celebrity, one of the first scientific celebrities of the modern world, and a notoriously upright Victorian, no sins. Well, I did this dissertation on the evolution of his scientific thought, and he's been well documented in the two thick volume Life and Letters biography. And there again, his biographer at the time, 1907, was very Victorian. And Lord Kelvin was absolutely the pinnacle, the epitome of Victorian virtue. Mm-hmm. His only passion was science in the service of empire. Well, I thought, surely he must have had something. So I gave him an affair with an obscure, she doesn't appear in the sources, Irish woman with a very strong personality, a brilliant woman. In fact, we see in the book that she has probably been the germ of Lord Kelvin's own scientific discoveries. Utterly brilliant. And yet she's never heard of. Nobody's ever knew anything about her. So I invented her, of course, and then they had this passionate affair that was lost in all the manuscripts. It just never appeared anywhere. And I followed it then through his whole career, how they got together for wild, passionate trysts on the Irish coast and things of that sort. And I just had a lot of fun with it. And then, of course, our researcher, our doctoral student who's doing his dissertation over there, his wife forces him to track all this down. Mm-hmm. So he does track it all down. He gradually, it's an historical adventure how can he find in the sources what he needs to find? And he eventually does find it in old newspapers and old letters, in archives in Belfast and in Glasgow and here and there. And eventually he finds Lord Kelvin's great-granddaughter, great-great-granddaughter, also named Fiona, as the original mistress was, and just as feisty, just as outrageous. And our rather stodgy researcher finds himself having an affair with her. So it all comes around in the end. But then he goes back to his wife.
And that's called the Funeral Letters, is that?
The Fiona Letters.
The Fiona Letters. So
Fiona is the original and the reincarnation,
right,
kind of.
So that sounds fascinating. People can find that.
Well, I think
on
so.
Smashwords, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, all
Yes,
those.
yes.
And then your newest one, which isn't really your newest one.
No, this
But
is
your
my trial
first
run with Create Space as a
Mad Spirit Canyon.
Mad Spirit Canyon, which I'm
What is
calling-
Mad Spirit Canyon?
Well, it's a canyon in New Mexico to which 5 writers, fresh from a writing conference in Seattle, again, it's sort of autobiographical, they come out of this very stimulating writers conference. There's a poet, there's an essayist, there's a biographer, a fiction writer, and so on, memoirist. And they're very different, but they can't face going back to their humdrum lives back home. One of them's an English professor, another one's a tech writer somewhere. One of them's a chemical engineer, retired. They're all about 60. So they decide, what can we do to keep the spirit, the creative juices going? We've been so stimulated by this writers' conference. So they get together and they decide to have adventure. So they buy this large motorhome and they drive it to New Mexico, where one of them had lived as a hippie, an ex-nun hippie, in a commune. And they arrive at the commune is defunct now, the place is empty, and she says, well, that's a good place to start a writer's colony. So they go there with many misgivings, with good for good reason, because the place is utterly isolated. It's way out southeast of Albuquerque somewhere. No cell phone connection, no radio, no TV, nothing. 20 miles from the main road. It's this canyon, but they find it is a very interesting place. There's an old burned out mansion there. There's a mine there. There's a set of stocks. There's a thing over the, a sign over the road into the place, and a pond and a dam, and it's all abandoned, with all these relics of the people that have been there at one time or another and failed. Because the canyon itself, well, they left their spirits, of course. So their spirits, when you drink the water, appear. That's why I call it a ghost story. It's not really a ghost story. But there are spirits left in the canyon that if you drink the water, you go crazy and you start seeing these spirits. And you start, it's an alternative reality sort of story, too. You get into an altered state. And the canyon itself seems to have a kind of an agenda, a personality almost, in that it resents anybody who comes to stay there as an exotic species and worthy of being either destroyed or pushed out. So the canyon makes things hard for these people, and moreover tries to get them to commit group suicide. And the previous residents have done that. So our writers who come there in about 2002, when I wrote the book, gradually find all this, gradually find that the canyon resents them and is turning its immune system on them. And they start to have real doubts about their original intention. They're having adventure, all right.
So the point of view that you use.
The point of view switches between these 5 writers. They each write chapters of what they originally intend to be a memoir of the whole thing. And as I say, they're all very different, and their point of view is of what is happening to them and whether they should stick it out or whether they should get the hell out of there. it changes dramatically. And of course, there's 2 men and 3 women, and they're all unmarried, and they start to, team up, pair up, in very strange ways. So there's that element there too, the relationships between these 5 writers. So it's a character-driven and situation-driven and relationship-driven sort of yarn that I find interesting. But then it's my child.
Well, those are 2 very compelling sounding stories. You've sold me. I'm going to have to read both of them before the summer's out.
Well, I don't know. In the reading, you might not find it because, as I say,
well, there's only one way to find out.
Only one way to find out. But by all means, read, and I will have 5 of these available by the end of the month from Create Space.
So Foxleaf Books is 24 West Broad Street in Cookeville.
Lots of
Please
books.
come by.